and welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast. I'm your host, Olivia D'Souza, and today I am interviewing Ainslee Cooper. Ainslee, welcome.
Hi Olivia, thank you for having me.
Great. Lovely to have you. Can you tell me a bit about yourself? Who is Ainslee Cooper?
Yeah, sure. So I am an anthropologist specialising in disability inclusion. As a person with a disability, I've seen many barriers throughout my life, experienced many barriers, and I've decided after a nervous breakdown that I wanted to address those barriers and help other people with disabilities by helping businesses identify these invisible barriers so they can provide inclusive experiences for people with disabilities.
That's great. I read a little bit that you sent me about yourself, and I think this is so true across lots of different areas in life, is that we can go around and be kind of blind and not see what's in front of us. And I think that's what you found in your experience as a kid. You thought that the difficulties you faced, you had to fit in and you had to adapt, and it was all on you. Would that be correct?
Absolutely, that's it. I didn't even realise that they were barriers until much later on in life. I just assumed that that's how society was, and but just had to go with the flow and fit into what other people were expecting of me.
So then what happened? Can you explain what led you to the
Yeah,
realisation?
sure. So for the first thing was that when I was in my 20s, I suffered an injury due to negligence in the hospital that resulted in me having to spend about 12 months in bed. During that time, I was in hospital and at home in bed. And during that time, I can remember a big fear of my brain turning to mush, just watching daytime TV, being away from work. And so at that time, I started to pick up some study. So that's where the anthropology stuff came in. As a result of that injury, I started to need disability services at home. I'd never used disability services before. And once I started to have to utilise those, I started to notice the way people were talking to me were really different to what I was used to. And I just could not put my finger on as to why these people were talking to me this way. And then, later on down the track, about 15 years later, when the NDIS came in, basically I met up with other disabled people and I hadn't really had much experience with other disabled people before. And we were comparing these experiences, and it turned out that, it wasn't just me finding these experiences weird, they're actually happening across the board. So flash forward a few years later after that, I had a nervous breakdown due to bullying in the workplace and decided that, okay, I've got my degree now in anthropology and I needed to use that to help address these issues and help society provide a more inclusive experience for people with disabilities.
Wow, okay. Can you explain, first of all, anthropology is the study of people
Yeah. Yeah,
and
so basically it's the study of humankind, people in all forms. So looking at the way we live and how we dwell in society, so how we relate to each other, and looking at things like even language, and like archaeology is a part of anthropology as well, looking at how people in history lived as well.
so that gave you a bit more of a macro view, did it?
Absolutely. It was like, I remember when I took my first class, it was just like, wow, everything around me is making sense, and I can actually see things that were going on around me that I couldn't even see before. Like, for example, my partner used to play baseball. And one of the things I noticed after studying was the difference in the way, for example, men play baseball in comparison to how women play baseball. Like the men, for example, would be like, digging at each other and slurring at the opponents and whatever. Whereas, if a guy got injured, the other guys would be like, oh, well, whatever. But when the woman, they were helping each other and making sure that, that the opposition were okay. And even if they identified things were wrong in what they were doing, they would help the opposition. So it was that seeing those differences is really fascinating.
It is fascinating. I
Yeah.
think when you're in it, you can't see sometimes, so that must be fascinating to study. It would be a bit like aliens coming and seeing us and realizing how
Exactly.
how not illogical we are. So, but you experienced this as a child. What were your disabilities as a child?
Yeah, so I'm a wheelchair user. Uh,
Wheelchair. So you always had that.
yeah, yeah. So that's basically been it. Yeah.
So what was the difference then when you suddenly noticed people were treating you differently after your 12 months? What were they?
Because I think, I've been around people who just knew me as me. And so when I started to have like access to disability services, the people were coming in, were talking to me like a disabled person. So they had obviously had unconscious bias about disabled people and the things that, how to address us. For example, a lot of the older people would use what's known as sing song talk. So, like, hello, dear, how are you? That kind of stuff. And like, so I remember when that first happened, and even like things like, the expectation of disabled people. I'd have people coming in, and when they found out I worked and I studied, they were like, "Oh, wow, really?"
Wow.
Just
Yeah.
exactly right. So it's those kind of things that I noticed, whereas everybody else was just used to me being me. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And these are people who are trained in the area. Oh my
That's the frightening
goodness.
part. Yeah. So I did throughout my business, like I've identified that a lot of the people coming in didn't have experience with people with disabilities prior to coming into the role. So I do a bit of speaking to groups that are doing their certificate for in disability, just to give them a bit of a insight into what we're really like, so that they know that, yeah, when they go into a person's home, because that's where I get my care in the home, that they're not coming into somebody abnormal. They're coming into just a person's home to help them.
Wow. It's stuff that should be obvious, but we
Yeah.
are, as a species, have a long way to go.
Yeah, like there's actually one frightening stat that I heard is that in regards to disability, so people with disabilities are 40 years behind women in the equality movement and a further 10 years behind Indigenous Australians. So we're 50 years behind everybody else in equality.
Wow. Well, just as well we're having the conversation. Well, a shame that we have to, but I'm
Mm.
glad. So this was happening to you your whole life, probably, but you were buffered from it because you were mostly surrounded by your friends, people that knew you, and you
Mhm.
saw you as Ainslee, and then
Yeah,
you get to a point where you're facing the rest of the world.
yeah.
Goodness. All right. What's in the book, by the way? Is there anything that you would like to cover that I don't want to skip over? Is there anything?
I'm just trying to think. Oh, good question. I'm trying to think anything in there that I haven't already discussed already.
So you came to study it, and so how are you trying to get out there and get the message out to people?
So it's been interesting. So I started my business in 2019 after finishing in my previous job, and so yeah, I do my consulting business. I run it from home. It's all pretty much online, and that's luckily with COVID happening. So for me, it's been good that COVID hasn't interrupted anything that I do. COVID's actually made people more aware of like disability inclusion. It's a shame that a pandemic had to happen for that to occur. And that's actually, I'm also doing my PhD at the moment, looking at the influence of the pandemic on disabled people and identity due to all the changes that have been happening with inclusion. So yeah, so basically, I've been helping sustainability services firms. I'm currently designing a disability action plan with a local gallery. I utilize 360-degree feedback, so that's getting feedback from every party that's involved in the business, from consumers to contractors and staff and volunteers and board members as well. So, and I also, yeah, as I said, so I also do some speaking engagements. I've got one coming up next week on December the 3rd, which is International Day of People with Disabilities as well.
Great. So you're educating people, which because we clearly need it. So a sustainability business. So they make sure that they are that
Yeah, so there's
every way that they interact.
Yeah, so with the sustainability services firms, ones I've been engaged with have been designing disability. So in Victoria, we call them disability action plans. Mm-hmm. And in New South Wales, I think they're disability inclusion and action plans. So this particular firm was responsible for ensuring the clients that they're contracted to have all of the different sustainability plans in place, so including reconciliation action plans and employment plans, etc. So in that case, I was employed by them, or contracted by them to help them develop a plan to employ people with disabilities in an equitable manner.
How does that play out? Are people embracing and taking on and really getting what you have to share?
Yeah, look, it's been a hard, interesting sort of journey. So there's a lot of businesses that when they hear about what I do, they're like, oh, no, that's just the idea of making things inclusive. And it's not that, this might sound bad, but yeah, they're all about saying, oh, look, it's too expensive. And yeah, I totally get that. But, people with disabilities, anybody should be included, and money shouldn't have to be a factor. And that's not the business's fault. That comes from, to me, that's a government issue. There's a lot of money given to individual when it comes to like disability, for example, because I'm involved in a few different boards. When it comes to advocacy issues for people with disability, the government provides money for individual advocacy, but they don't provide money to address systemic advocacy issues. So if they did that, then, businesses would have money to access to address these issues, and these conversations wouldn't be so hard.
So you're suggesting that they get some sort of across-the-board funding so that businesses have an even playing field is that...
Absolutely, yeah. Rightly, that money has to come from somewhere, and so like, you've got businesses that are just non-for-profits. So, obviously, if they want to address accessibility issues or inclusion issues, you've got to think, okay, well, where am I actually going to get that money from? It's a real problem.
And of course, it should be just considered a part of running a business. That of course it should be inclusive to everyone.
Yeah, and that's the hurdle. So I think now that COVID's happened and everyone's been aware of the things that we should do because of COVID, they're sort of going. I think that I don't know whether or not they're actually aware that this is what disabled people have actually faced pretty much their whole lives. So, but there's more of a shift to thinking about how can we include this in the practices now to make sure that in the future, we've addressed it.
So what changes would you like to see?
So let me think. For example, like disability employment, although I don't deal with employment in my particular business, disability employment's pretty huge at the moment. There's like 50% of Australians with disabilities unemployed. So that's ridiculous. So like we're actually the lowest ranking, we're the 8th ranking OECD country. So that's just, that's a ridiculous number to be in, considering we're Australia. So there's changes there. But basically, I'd like people to think about, okay, what are the barriers that I've faced in COVID, and what do I need what did I need to actually get over those barriers, and think, okay, well, that was me. What about so that other people might actually face those barriers? So take what we've learned in COVID and move forward with that.
Yes, because I guess a lot of people feel like they realise what they've lost, and then they could take the next breath and realise, oh, but I have a lot of privilege compared to some other people who've dealt with stuff for way before any of this happened.
Yeah.
So how does it feel that you've been out there and you have been implementing these changes? How does that make you feel to see businesses put in place what you are teaching?
I love it. I just even like doing this project at the moment, like seeing the suggestions, because all the recommendations, they don't come from me. The recommendations come from the feedback. And so it's great to see the feedback that there are people who are actually thinking about these things and just don't know how to implement them. So being able to shape that so that, so they've got a framework to go forward. That's just, it feels really great that, as a person with a disability, it just feels great that, people are thinking about including people like myself.
Finally. And then they listen to you, actually
Yeah,
listen from being
yeah,
the person who was
yeah. And
spoken
that's the
to.
thing. I've always made sure that I don't do it from my perspective, because very early on in my business career, like, I mean, I've only been operating for like nearly 3 years, but yeah, uh, it was people were assuming that I was operating things from my own perspective and saying, okay, this is what my problem is, you need to fix that. And it's not about that at all. Like, I don't, I mean, yeah, sure, like I do see things that need to be changed, but it's not about me. It's about the disability community and society, making sure everything is inclusive.
And what challenges do you face when you try to make the changes in the world?
Like the money thing, like, the money conversation in regards to, like, yeah, how do we, like, that's a big thing. And look, I'm in Geelong, so I can understand, so, the area that we're living in, we've got old buildings, and so buildings that don't require changes because of the rules and regulations. I can't remember what year it was it came in where it said, buildings need to be accessible. So yeah, it's those kind of conversations that I find the hardest. And but also the other thing is as well, because of, so with the anthropology, I'm not just worried about buildings. I mean, I don't deal with access to, like, that, access to buildings, that kind of stuff. That's access consultants game. Mine is about the experience the person has with that business. So there are a lot of things that people can do within their business to make sure that consumer experience is accessible. And it doesn't actually take very much to make those changes. Like, for example, as you can see, I've got my COVID hair on. I haven't been to a hairdresser for about 8 months. And it's actually quite like, I'll tell you this quick story. I had to change hairdressers a few years ago when the previous hairdresser I used to go to closed down. They were taken over and they had an accessible basin, but this particular new hairdresser, who didn't realise it, had actually taken out the accessible basin and put a new basin in, which was attached to the chair. And as a wheelchair user, I can't actually slide in and out of that chair. It's not safe for me. So I need to find a hairdresser that has a basin with no chair, so that my wheelchair can slide in and get my hair done. And it took me 3 months to find a new hairdresser. So in Geelong, for example, it's a very rare thing. So, and that comes down to money as well, because I found out the barrier behind that is that they want to make sure they've got as many basins and chairs connected as possible, because it means more seats in the salon, more money coming in. So, you've got those kind of, you can understand why they've done those things, but it then excludes people.
And that's a constant frustration. I was going to ask you if things are getting any better and if new places are being made any better, but there's still these things that
Yeah,
fall through the cracks. Big,
actually,
big things.
yeah. And at the last, now it's United Australian Human Rights Commission, disability, the last findings, disability was the largest complained about issue. So that's like the largest complaints about access and inclusion. So it's still, it really is a huge issue. And unfortunately, I mean, COVID, I hate saying COVID's been great, but what's been happening has been great in regards to the changes. But yeah, unfortunately, we are starting to see some things slipping back to how they were. So we're just, the disability community is really hoping that people just, catch themselves before that happens.
You certainly do. You need a voice, really, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that you are using yours. Is this what led you to your? Is it that, I mean, you had a year of being, recover or hospitalized, right? You were
Yeah.
in the hospital for the whole year. Is that, and then you also had that realization of being treated differently? Was it
Yeah.
those things led to the nervous breakdown?
No.
No,
So
or
no, no. I was The nervous breakdown happened long after that. So, well, the nervous breakdown happened back in 2016. So that was due to bullying in the workplace by a middle manager.
Do you think that was
Yeah.
related to your disability, or?
I don't know. I think there was a lot of issues in that workplace that resulted in the bullying. I do know that it wasn't, although it felt like it was isolated. I found out much later that it wasn't. Basically, it was something that was going on, and each person that was being bullied did not know that it was happening to everybody else. So, yeah,
Someone
yeah.
like that is just not nice generally.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of what led you to
Yeah, so yeah, basically after that experience, I mentally could not cope with the idea of working for somebody else again. So I don't like I'd already graduated with my honors degree, and I'd always wanted to be like, from that point of like started studying, I knew I wanted to be an anthropologist. I knew that, but then there was the idea of working for somebody again. So I was like, I can't do that. So what am I going to do? And yeah, a friend asked me at the gym, which I joined up with the gym and started powerlifting as a way to help deal with the nervous breakdown. They just said to me, well, what's your ideal job? What would you like to do? And I just said, well, I want to help people. And then it kind of clicked. Okay, so I want to help people. There's this issue that's been going on that I've been seeing, in the disability sector, which is obviously more widespread than the disability sector. And then so my friend at the gym said, well, why don't you do that? And I'm just like, what? Oh, okay, I'm going to start my own business. Yeah. And I did. So, yeah, so I started with nothing. And yeah,
Wow,
here
it
I am.
certainly helps to talk to
Oh,
supportive friends, isn't it, to help find that clarity?
absolutely. Yeah. It's like it was all there. And like
Yeah.
writing this chapter for the book, it was all there, all these different pieces, even like, even going back to childhood, there's all these different pieces, and it's just kind of like, wow, the whole path, it just was right there.
It just needed to be lit up so you could see
Yeah,
it, huh?
yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything you would like, any message or anything that you would like to say before we wrap up?
No, not that I can think of. No, no.
Well, it's
But I
been
hope
an
everyone enjoys reading the book.
I think
Yeah,
they will be so interesting, and your
yeah.
chapter I can't wait to read. And I'm so
Thank
glad you
you.
have shared your story. I think it's really, really important.
Oh, I'm so glad I was approached to share it. When they approached me, I was just like, I don't have anything to share. And then when I started writing, I was just like, oh, actually, I do. Yeah,
I'm glad they approached you. I was.
yeah,
That's a compliment.
yeah, absolutely.
And how can people connect with you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, Ainslee Hooper on LinkedIn. There's also Ainslee Hooper Consulting on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, Ainslee Hooper Consulting, and my website, ainsleyhooper.com.au.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And so we'll have all those links in the show notes and
Mm-hmm.
also links on how to buy the book as well. So thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thanks, Ainsley.
No, thank you.